All right. That's really wiping me out. Good to see you. Apologize for the hair. Um, I was outside today and it's been cold here in Michigan. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and jump on and talk about post-holiday stress. As we all know, there are 4 taboos. We have a tendency to look at our family and our friends when we have a holiday like Thanksgiving here in the States from the lens of, did we talk about politics? Did we talk about religion? Do we talk about sex? Do we talk about money? So, as we also may be aware, there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about all 4 of those in some way, shape, or form. And you've probably had some of this experience in your own family, maybe even in your circle of friends. And the thing that I just wanted to jump on and share a couple of things with you about is that that's okay. It's okay if we don't agree. It's okay if we have a different position on something. It's also okay that we don't talk about those things at the table, because again, the whole point of this is to get together to give thanks for the good things that happened to us this year, positive relationships. But let's spend a minute talking about the fact that that's just not always the case. We have family members that it's very difficult to be around. We also have people in our orbit who have a tendency to want to tell us how we should think, how we should feel, what things should mean to us, and they like to be deeply critical of our behavior. So a couple of things that I'm going to share with you that hopefully will help. I realize it's a couple of days after the meal, or maybe you had it over the weekend. If I see a person who comes into my therapy room and says, I feel very strongly about one of those 4 things, politics and money, and they tell me that they're frustrated because they can't get their family to wake up to their way of thinking, one of the things that I'm going to invite us to consider is, why do I need them to think the way that I do? What is happening in that moment? What does that feel like, to feel like, why don't they feel the same way that I do? A few years ago, this happened, I think, in a more stilting way. And when I say more stilting way, I think it was much more jarring to us to find out that people that we had known for a very long time really didn't think the same way that we do, or maybe didn't share some of our beliefs or some of our concerns about things in our world, or they felt very differently, almost opposed. In fact, when Dave and O and I put together Severed Conscience, one of the things that we looked at were those interpersonal relationships. What happened to our sense of community? What happened to our sense of relationship? Well, it began to really crumble. And when you think about that from the standpoint that sometimes we want people to believe what we believe because that shared sense of community gives us a sense of strength. It also invites a sense of support. And when we don't feel like we have that, we don't always feel safe. And when I say safe, what I mean is, what can I say in front of that person? Now, interestingly enough, I had a conversation recently with somebody wherein I think they were kind of probing to see where I was politically. I don't have a position. So the interesting thing was that I didn't pick up on that's what they were trying to do in the way that they were crafting their language with me. Instead, what I heard was, I'm kind of frustrated because a couple of these people made some comments. That's what I heard. And I said, I can appreciate there are people who really feel very strongly about these things. And then they asked me the question outright, because apparently I didn't answer it the way that they expected. In truth, what they were really looking for is, can I trust you with what I think about something that is a hot button topic? And if you watched yesterday's video where I talked about slowing down and really listening, putting the other person first in the conversation, I hope that what you understood was sometimes a person will probe us to find out, how do you think about things? What is your opinion? What do you believe? And the reason that they want to know is because they've decided that if you don't think the same way that they do, there is something fundamentally that is going to present a significant upheaval to that person. And I don't know if I can illustrate this enough, but it happened that I was sitting with a couple wherein he had very strong political views and began to talk about some online activity around those very strong political views. He was angry. His face turned beet red. His breathing changed, almost like a state of panic, because that's how angry he was that people were not appreciating his point of view and were not coming to his side. And no matter how much he was trying to impress upon them that they were not right and that they needed to think differently, he couldn't convince them, which further frustrated him and angered him. We had a really difficult time getting to the root of that anger. And I'll tell you why. One of the things that happens to us when we are creating a belief around something is our perspective. You've heard me talk about this before if you've watched any of my past videos. I don't know, maybe you didn't. Maybe you got 30 seconds in and went, not for me. That's okay too. The challenge is, can we sit with someone who doesn't agree with us in a myriad of things? Can we sit with someone, be present with them, listen to the end of what they think, how they believe, and what they feel to gain an understanding of why it's important to them? I hear people on all sides of both religious questions, on sexual issues, and politics. Politics in a number of countries is a hotly contested issue. Now, sometimes we sit down with people that we've known all of our lives, and maybe they haven't said anything, or maybe only recently did they become vocal. And I'm reminded of a client that I sat with about 5 years ago, almost 6. The client said something about feeling such a significant sense of loss, not just for the client, but also for the client's children. And when I started to probe around that, I said, what do you feel like has changed? Now, in that moment, I was surprised because this is a person that throughout the course of my contact with them had given no indication of any political leanings. They had talked about very immediate problems, very substantial health issues. So this kind of struck me from out in left field. But the more that I sat and listened, the more that I began to realize that there was an existential crisis that was happening for this person. And that existential crisis was that this person felt that something was about to be taken away from them. I think if we invite ourselves to be patient with people who don't agree with us, and we're pretty well clued in, I think, to most of the people that don't agree with us. But if we take the time to understand that person's position on this, we also begin to get a different sense of where their frustration is, where their fears are, and what the challenges are that they're facing in view of those things. Now, does that help you in the moment while you're sitting there? It can. Actually, it can diffuse. Although you will get 1 or 2 people who will say, oh yeah, you only care because. Well, that's natural because they're already on the defensive when they're telling you what they think, especially if you have been outwardly demonstrating your position on these things. It's difficult for people to understand. I found myself in this very same position. I've been watching something that's been happening over in the UK, and I keep thinking, what motivates a person to behave this way? What is it that ultimately they think is happening that this is the appropriate and correct response to this? And then the more that I look at it, the more that I realize that the motivations are not what I would think would be important motivations. What is motivating them is something very different. In some instances, it's financial. In some instances, some other activities over there have caused them to take a second look at, how do I get around this? Because financially, this is going to be a problem for generations. So we begin to look at things, from the lens of, how do we help this person to see that what they're doing is probably really dangerous and detrimental to an entire culture and lifestyle. But if that's something that is so far outside of their field of view because they really think they're doing something really positive and really good, they're not prepared to see that maybe they are the baddie. I forget David's last name. He's an actor over there. I think sometimes it invites us to look at, how do I show up for people, and am I on the right side? Sometimes we don't know in the moment, and we have to kind of get a 1,000-foot view to say, am I contributing to the problem? And I do this a lot with clients, especially couples. When I do discernment counseling, I ask them, how are you contributing to the problem? Now, sometimes I get clients that will look at me and go, I'm not doing anything. It's them. Which invites us to a very different conversation. Because if we're not actively working to resolve the problem, sometimes our silence really is contributing to the problem. But also, the way that we approach the problem can be even more detrimental to getting the problem resolved. When I think about this, I've sat across from couples where one or both of them have looked at the other and said, you need to fix them. They're the problem. And then when I start to invite them to tell me what it is that the other person is doing that is so problematic, oddly enough, when they hear it out loud, they're frustrated. You can hear the deep frustration. And what they're really saying is, I don't like that behavior. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel unsafe. And I feel like they're telling me they don't like me. They don't respect me. They don't love me. They don't care about me. They're being selfish. Well, underneath it, when we start to peel the layers back, sometimes it isn't because the other person is being selfish. Sometimes that's our interpretation because we don't know that maybe that person approached this from a very different perspective. If you consider two people have to make a decision about something, and I really want you to let this marinate in your noodle. If two people have to make a decision about something that is important to them in their life experience, one of them may be, I hear this a lot from an acquaintance of mine. He'll say the people that live up in the hinterlands have a tendency to be engaged in activities that are probably not very healthy. Based on what? But see, the fear that that person has, I think, comes back to, I've seen these people behave in ways that I don't agree with, and it makes me very uncomfortable because I have an idea of what a society should look like. Now, when I think about living in a remote part of the country, I'm not thinking that I'm doing anything nefarious or that I'm trying to hide out. What I'm thinking is I'm really appreciating the solitude. I'm appreciating the beauty of the land. I'm appreciating what the land does. I'm appreciating how I feel in that space and what it means to me to be someplace where the beauty is just captivating. I've lived in Grand Canyon National Park. I've lived just outside of the Badlands. I've lived in the Black Hills. I've also lived in Las Vegas. I've lived in San Diego, or a suburb, Chula Vista. And now I live in a farm community. I really appreciate the farmers. I deeply appreciate what they do, the sacrifices that they make, the long hours that they put in. So each of those lends a different perspective, because when we look at things through a very careful lens, we begin to see that people truly are reasons and decisions, and not everything has some negative, aspect to it that, we need to condemn and push away. So I say all that to say the way that we manage the post-Thanksgiving stress is we need to step back and recognize that people are reasons and decisions. And if we can love them through those reasons and decisions by gaining some perspective on why they believe what they believe. And a more close to home example, talking with a family member who 12 or 15 years ago was deeply upset about a number of things that were happening on a national stage. And then they buried their head in the sand for a little while. And having a conversation, all that I did was ask questions. Tell me, what does that mean to you? How did you come to figure out that this is what's going on? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? How are we testing that? What are some other resources to this? Because one of the difficulties is if we're looking at things online to try to get a perspective, I'm going to inform you right now, most algorithms are going to guide you to something that supports your worldview, because that's how artificial intelligence and algorithms work. It's looking for things that you like in order to keep you engaged in those things. So to look at something outside of that creates a challenge if you're going to do it online, which is why I still love books. It's also why I like to look at the past as kind of an indicator. A wonderful article that I read from 1994 by a now retired professor. He was a German professor who worked at, I believe it was University of Edinburgh. And he wrote a paper about the overlaying of culture, how the English came to dominate Scotland. And I thought it was fascinating to read this because I'd never considered this before. Then I read the Highland Clearances. Then I went over there. You get a very different perspective when you're on the ground and you're standing on the ground where it happened. Then I came home and I thought about our own Civil War. I thought about the conflicts that we participated in. So how does this help you to manage the stress? It invites us to examine ourselves for what is our perspective? How am I looking at this? And then when I've uncovered my perspective, what are my biases in this? What are my beliefs about this? And then, is there something that I can do to be more patient with the people who don't agree with me? Because I have clients who walk in there deeply resistant. So I have a choice to make. I can engage with them and I can try to connect with them, or I can disconnect. Ethically, I'm doing everything I can to develop that rapport and to help them get where they want to go, and putting aside my own interests in order to see them get where they want to go. Unfortunately, when a client walks in, they don't have ethics. When they walk in, nobody is governing them except them. And sometimes they have zero appreciation for anybody else's time. And sometimes I need to remember that the reason that they have so little appreciation for anybody else's time is because they feel like no one values theirs. Now, I'm going to sum this all up by saying what I'm encouraging us to do is to understand a little more what is happening for the people that we don't agree with. And that means loving them through it. And the way that I love people through things that I don't agree with them on is I get curious about, why is this important to you? I sat for about 45 minutes with somebody not too long ago who was trying to impress upon me. I met this person on an airplane. They were trying to impress upon me how there were things that we needed to be doing different in the field of psychotherapy. They were telling me how we need to be more engaged in this process and how there needs to be more effort put into drugs for all of these different things. And then I just asked the simple question: if we put more people on medication, when do they learn how to overcome the adversity and the difficulty that they face? When do they learn that it's okay that they have a different opinion than we do? When do they learn that it's okay if they struggle with something? In fact, I encourage clients to struggle. I think the more that we can confront the things that we're afraid of, the more successful we'll be at building the muscle of resilience. But also, we create connection. So those are just my random thoughts on a Monday night about how we can deal with post-Thanksgiving stress. Now, as we go into Christmas, we might still be sitting across from somebody. You still get to decide, who am I when I show up in the face of those people? I can be loving and kind, or I can be a jerk. You get to decide. I'm Kelly, the Kilted Therapist. Hit that like and subscribe.